I find as I get older and realistically closer to the end, I find that my thoughts are much more often drawn to the awesome mystery of everything. Mystery of this planet, everything on it, and beyond. I mean, what is life? What is death? Do either really exist? Does consciousness, awareness, this kind of alive knowing that we feel, does that precede the arising of matter, materiality, or is it the other way around? What's real? Or what's apparent, but not necessarily real? I mean, here we are. Homo sapiens. We're the last of the hominids on this planet. There were many others, but it's just us at this point in terms of the hominids. And we live on this very small, wet rock that's just hurtling through space. In a tiny little solar system, we're spinning around it. And that little solar system is part of this galaxy, this one galaxy that has billions of solar systems in it. And that galaxy is part of a whole family of galaxies that have billions of galaxies in it. And it's all headed to someplace unfathomable. I mean, it leaves me awestruck when I think about it. When I get out of my little space of me, here we are. Whatever we is. And so for longer than recorded history, the monkeys on this rock, us, descended from apes, have been trying to figure out what's the deal, And all these various religions have sprung up along the way, and they offer answers. Oh, it's this way, or it's this way. And this is the reason for it, and this is why. And there's lots of really smart people with lots of gray matter packed into their skull, have thought about and constructed philosophical and psychological threads of how this all works. And to probe even deeper our search for understanding, we develop prayers, incantations, all kinds of practices, worshiping rituals. We find substances to take to alter our consciousness, all in pursuit of deep wisdom. We're kind of wired to be curious. And in this juncture, my own kind of personal exploration, I'm really fascinated with how these various religions, philosophies, practices, how do they intersect? Where do they intersect? I find that interesting. It's like tracking Hurricane Beryl this week. There's all these modeling, and you'll see the various meteorological modelings, and it's like, what do they call it, the spaghetti lines. But it gives us a kind of like, oh, they kind of all intersect here, and this one may be way out there, but mostly they kind of intersect, and we kind of use it, for creating safety or whatever we need to do. Now, if we use this metaphor in human understanding of these spaghetti lines of various philosophies and understandings, where the modeling lines seem to come together, has been called natural awareness, unity consciousness, the non-dual perspective. Peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. Peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. Those are words by Rupert Spira in his pithy attempt to try to capture the essence of this perspective, this unified perspective. I mean, it's almost impossible to put into words. I mean, this direct experience of the unity of everything. But that's found if you search into the deepest cores of almost all the religions, the major religions and not so major religions and philosophies. So you could say it's the world's wisdom modeling threads, the spaghetti noodles, they kind of are at this unification. So this understanding and experience is an experience of unbounded, peaceful, loving awareness. And there's a knowingness to it, not of facts, but a knowingness, a cognizance. And in that, there can be like a wordless flash of full understanding. It just can't articulate it, but it's, or something knows in that moment. There's a flash of that complete unification of everything, if even just for a moment. And sometimes it's triggered in ways, we're just going through our day. And then bam, something opens up. We look deeply into a flower or the pollen on a bumblebee's legs or whatever it might be. And we are just, for that moment, everything. There's no diversification. There's no me, you, it, whatever. It opens. And in those flashes, when they happen, the appearance of things and the diversity of everything, we know in that moment that it belies the deepest truth, that I am a separate, solid, embattled thing, and there's all these other separate, solid things. In that moment, we know that that's not true. And that everything that we perceive is shot through or infused with whatever you want to call it, awareness, consciousness, God. This from Alan Watts, he says, you are a function of what the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing. We perceive some difference, but it belies the truth of connection. And that experience or glimpse of that undivided, absolute communion with everything is available to all 8 billion of us. And it doesn't take 50 years of meditation practice, And it's not a stretch to say that if there was more of this kind of experience, this glimpse, momentary, by more hominids, things would be different. That I think the common good might be enhanced. The better angels of our nature would be well fed and cared for. I mean, how could we not act more gracefully if we're experiencing more and more of the time unity with everything? Why would we want to harm anything? Because we are everything. But that's not the case. It's not exactly where we are as a species right now. And the paradoxical thing is, that there's no place to get to. There's no there to get to. Everything is available now and here in this moment. Now, allow me to digress a little bit. We'll get back to this kind of stuff. But today's July 2nd, okay? We've got a holiday coming up, so to speak. But 248 years ago, on this day, July 2nd, 1776, at the Continental Congress, delegate from Virginia, Richard Henry Lee, proposed a resolution that we become separate and independent from Britain. Now, that resolution he proposed a month prior in June, but it created such rancor and confusion and heated debate that the people at the Congress back in early June said, we got to think about this. Let's get some people together and write up a more formal resolution. So our man Tom on the Hill, Ben Franklin, who else was involved? John Adams, Massachusetts, Robert Livingston from New York, Roger Sherman of Connecticut. That was a committee to write up a formal resolution. So they spent like 3 weeks working on this together, and there was a lot of input and a lot of editing, and especially John Adams. He made like 68 edits. Jefferson wrote the first draft, and then they chewed it up. And there's some interesting things about it. So they come back on July 2nd and they say, we're going to vote this resolution. Yes. 2 days later, they formalize it, July 4th. And a little aside, the curmudgeon John Adams that he was, he would never celebrate the 4th of July because it didn't happen then in his mind. It was July 2nd. So he wouldn't have any of that stuff that went on. He didn't attend anything. It was July 2nd for him. Another thing that's interesting that you might not have known is that the first draft written by Jefferson had a really strong denunciation of slavery written into it. You know? And this is very paradoxical for a slave owner who was conflicted, like a lot of people were. But by the time all the editing happened and the voices from different parts of the country, that was completely erased for the sake of compromise and unity of the 13 colonies to continue to fight the war together. When you think about US history and all histories, really, the better angels of human nature have been in conflict or opposition with what the Buddha called the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. Look at any country's history. Look at our own. This is really a time of year to reflect on this country, how it came about, etc. So we have a country here that's founded by a mix of people that were escaping persecution for one reason or another, and other people came here just, hey, there's opportunity, we want a better life, things are kind of closed down here. So a bunch of migrants, kind of misfits in a way, weren't interested in staying where we came from, and so we came here and got to work. But sadly, the energies of survival, which are very strong energies, and we talk about them a lot in practice, and the energies for personal gain, the descendants of those early immigrants felt it okay to justify the genocide of the native people that were here and to enslave other people for personal gain. not to mention denying women all their inalienable rights. You know the phrase, all men are created equal, you know. So it's a kind of inconvenient truth, to borrow Al Gore's words, that much of humankind, the history, shows us acting out of self-interest, moved by those energies of survival, those not so better angels of personal gain, often given shade by religious doctrines. We can do all this, and here's the religious reason why it's okay, you know. And you see that all over the world. And in this country, supported by something we conveniently labeled manifest destiny, God's plan, you know, to take this when available, take this when available, do this. It's God's plan. So that brings us, it gives us our mixed history. And so when you think back to that original Continental Congress, we made that Faustian compromise to hold the Union together and kind of turn away from slavery or genocide of the native people. And we kept trying to hold that together, hold that bargain together. There was the compromises of 1820. There was a compromise of 1850, and eventually it all fell apart, and we fell into this tragic war. And still, the most casualties we've ever had in a war in this country is a civil war. And we know and we feel that the ramifications of that in today's politics and policies are still there. So we fast forward to today. And I know many of you here this evening are deeply concerned about our upcoming election and the recent Supreme Court decisions. You're deeply concerned about the changing tenor of governments around the world. You're deeply concerned about the environment and the treatment of less powerful groups of people. To me, it certainly feels like there is a wave of change that is growing in strength. And certain waves of change are often not the types of change that I would prefer. You know, as humans, we make our best guess as to what seems appropriate to do in words and action in any given situation. But being human comes with the possibility that we might be making a choice or an action out of ignorance, fear, or our own reactivity. But in those moments that we're reflecting, speaking and acting, it's really the best that we can bring forward. And I'm speaking for everybody on this planet. Sometimes we're just closed down. We're acting out of reactivity, but that's all we can get in touch with. That's all we know. But suffice it to say that right now, that much of the current situation on this planet today is the result of those powerful survival energies of greed, hatred, and delusion. But to our credit as humans, those energies are mixed with the energies of love, compassion, equanimity, forgiveness, you know. And together, all those energies mix up and we have this human cocktail. We can do the most amazing things, and we generally cooperate wonderfully. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to drive here, you know. There's so much cooperation. Yeah. And so this Dharma, these contemplative arts that we're all interested in, they offer you larger perspectives. That's what they do. On one hand, the Dharma helps you become aware of, understand, navigate, and befriend these survival energies that we all have. You know, that's the mindfulness action. What's going on right now? What am I feeling? What's driving me to think, say, or do this? You know, and it affords us the opportunity to temper them. We get little pauses and timeouts. I don't have to say that. And I can withdraw my mind from even thinking that. And also through these contemplative practices, there remains the possibility of the deepest tranquility, profound happiness, a kind of boundaryless connection with everything. Is what I was trying to elicit in the instructions tonight. Because all that's available right now, right here, even while the conditions internally in us or externally in our world as we see it are very challenging. Even while you're trying to effect change or resist the tide of history that is upon us with all your strength, this is a razor's edge of practice because both are possible. The energy of resistance, of doing what's possible to change, and being able to rest in happiness, joy, peace, and love. Some event happens, you feel unsettled, or you're freaked out, you know. Your contemplative practice asks you to very simply time out. What's going on here? Maybe it's anger, fear, disgust, whatever. So you turn toward that rising emotion, the sensation or the thought storm that might be happening. You accept it because it's the truth of the moment. I'm not trying to beat it down. Try to accept it, understand it. You explore where you feel it in the body. Bring whatever care and compassion to yourself, because in that moment, you might be suffering, all tangled up, all wrapped around the axle. And so you stay with this arising set of phenomena, and it may not be pleasant. You watch it. You learn how it grows, flowers, dissipates, and then dissolves out. You bring as much mindfulness and equanimity and compassion to yourself and these conditions that have arisen. And over time, as your practice deepens, you really internalize that it is possible to experience this tranquility and happiness even while a deep reflection is guiding your thoughts, words, and actions towards something that you have determined to be toward harmony and away from harm. We have to make those judgments all the time, and sometimes we're wrong, but that's what we do. Yeah. And through the wisdom of accepting the impermanence of all arising phenomena, because that's what it is. And the wisdom of learning the causes of suffering, learning how that the energies of grasping, wanting, attachment, however you want to say it, and the energies of aversion, hatred, rage, fear, guilt, and shame, how they kind of grab us and kind of suck us under for a period of time. And you learn to gradually see them. And by the seeing, it cuts their power right in that moment. Oh, I'm feeling fearful, you know? And you bring some compassion to yourself, whatever is necessary. And you go through a cycle. Okay, I've learned to be with fear. I've learned to be with my anger, not act it out. And gradually there's a confidence that grows. And that's what a contemplative practice is, a confidence in dealing with whatever arises. With mindfulness, you know, with acceptance, compassion. That's what we're kind of in training as we do these various practices, you know. And we learn when delusion takes hold of the mind, when we're kind of fighting nature in some way, we're not understanding it, you know. And we start to internalize the selfless nature of everything. Like, where is the self? You know? It's part of our investigation. Yeah, I mean, that's the way contemplative practice works. First, we take care of business, whatever's up. You know, you bring as much compassion as you can muster, as much mindfulness. And this confidence grows. And generally speaking, life becomes more easeful despite the external conditions. And as tranquility begins to more regularly replace the difficult emotions, there's an opportunity to experience something very, very special. That's the third aspect of practice that I was pointing at tonight. You get a glimpse, or sometimes an extended period, of abiding in what the mystics call the great natural perfection, illuminated awareness, the source, the unconditioned, the everything, as I'm kind of liking to call it these days, the everything. I'll finish with these words from Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye. One seeing, one knowing, and one love. That's the fruit of practice. So, are there comments or questions this evening? Or as I always like to say, answers. Anybody got any answers?
I'll just tell something about my experience, particularly the day following last week.
Let me get the mic so everybody can hear you. I think it's on. Just hold it close.
Yes, so back in 2017, I experienced, I lost a child suddenly and violently. And so it took me a while, but I realized that I guess a trauma response from that was really heightened sense of danger and threat. And it became widespread. So it wasn't just the phone call at night or even during the day.
Yeah.
sometimes the unexpected knock at the door would just be this huge threat response that I didn't realize at first. It took a couple of years, and I'm like, oh, this is from losing Meredith, and and then definitely any shooting that occurred in the United States, which was occurring with increased rapidity. And I'm finding now with the political situation, it's arising again. And so I'm particularly today, once I saw the news about the Supreme Court, and I've spent a good part of the day today. And it's not anger or hatred, it's grief at what's happening. And so I did a lot of definitely resting, just simply resting back in awareness, because it's like you say, it is so peaceful and so, yeah, it's like everything. I hadn't thought of it in that way, but that's a very good description, the everything. And then doing Tonglen practice. And it's just so helped me. And I started this journey after my daughter's death. Someone gave me a book, Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. And I don't know if she's still doing it, but she had those podcasts. And I would listen to a podcast every day and ride my bike. And then that just kind of set me on this path. And now, 7 years later, I just find it such a balm. Not only for me, but yeah, that the practice of also wishing it for everyone else who is also grieving the same sort of things that I am. So yeah, it's a lovely talk. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's a beautiful perspective. With traumatic loss, there are many ways to find refuge. And the challenge is to find what works for us. Tonglen practice is beautiful. Resting in awareness is beautiful. Reading some scripture might be helpful, So we are unique in some ways. We're together at the deepest level. And so part of practice is kind of finding what fits to allow us to continue to love, to have compassion, to care, despite what befalls us along the way.
I just want to say that I'm not too particularly have been listening to your Dharma talks for decades, I think. Is that true? Close. And that I particularly appreciate all along I have, but especially right now, your being able to articulate the fruits of your practice and how in some ways they're different than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And this place that you're at of this everything, undivided space. I appreciate knowing what all your years of where you are after all these years of practice, and that you are sharing that with us. Thank you.
John.
Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for this Dharma talk. I was curious if you would please offer some thoughts on how you understand how we're all interconnected in this everything.
I'll do my best. It's an impossible ask, but I'll do my best. Even if we look at it scientifically, with the instrumentation that we now have, which is pretty good. You know, we have electron microscopes, we've got all kinds of ways, and when we look in to our bodies, and we get down to the atomic level and the subatomic level and the subatomic level, and we now know that it's energy, some aspects of light, and this dashboard that we use, our senses, is pretty crude in the sense that this nice little statue here, this music stand, this body, all these bodies, your body, John, in the deepest inspection, it's vibration. Now we're taught, and for the benefit of survival of this skin bag that we carry around, to do certain things to allow it to survive, etc. But the deepest truth belies that separation. And that's where certain groups of scientists are landing. And so these practices, the contemplative practices, of which there are many and very many different paths, and a lot of those paths are really bona fide in the sense of if you take it to heart and practice or reflect or turn the mind back on itself or whatever the path might be, there will be instances where we just disappear. That conditioned belief that we have that we are separate just goes away. But it also can happen naturally, as I was saying in the talk. It can happen when we're in nature or we hold a puppy or a baby or whatever. Things just open. Where the boundaries go, you know, and that's a glimpse. And repeated glimpses kind of prime the pump for that to happen more often, kind of automatically, looking in the face of another, you know. There's not another there. There's the big I, you know. I know that's no answer, John, but that's the best I can do tonight. Yeah, so scientifically, you can kind of intellectually get it, but that's really not enough. You know, there's the applying and turning the mind. You know, the Tibetans have the technique in Dzogchen where they have a little phrase: look, see, let go, be free. You kind of turn the mind, awareness, looking at awareness, if that's even possible, and then boom, for just a moment, it opens. You know, and there are various portals to play in that might elicit this for us. And we're all a little different. For some, it's loving kindness practice or chanting, you know, or mantra practice or whatever it might be. All of a sudden, boom, there's an opening. You know, in some of the Zen practices, you know, the koan practice, where you're given questions that you can't be answered. And eventually your mind breaks. You try and try and try, and your mind breaks open. You know? Or in some of the more rigorous sitting practices, where you don't move, you're deprived of sleep, your mind's aching, it's screaming, you know, you're all over the place. And all of a sudden, it breaks open. Satori, as Zen would say. There's a moment of opening. Native people, you know, sweat lodges, unbearably hot, vision quest, you know, sun dancing, you know.
And the arts.
And the arts.
And the arts.
Absolutely. All of them. You know, all these portals. Yeah.
In a ballet. In a piece of music. Looking at a piece of art.
Yeah. So here we are on this small wet rock, careening through space to who knows where. Somehow we're alive. We don't even really know what that is. But we're curious. And we've been curious. Our ancestors. Back and back and back and back. To our ancestors who climbed out of those trees and spread around. And you know, quantity-wise, we're doing pretty good. There's 8 billion of us. We got some things to iron out. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, well, thank you for your attention. Enjoy our lovely spring here that we've been gifted with in Charlottesville, Virginia, planet Earth.